plant carrots.
Oh, Marcia, aren't you a little sad that summer is winding down and we have this chill in the air?
Well, I'm sad that the raspberries are gone, but other than that, we have a few squash left over in the garden, and that's kind of fun. So, I think fall's a great time of year in the garden. I enjoy it.
Well, your raspberries look very healthy.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how you start from the very beginning?
Sure. These raspberries are about 4 years old now, and I started by putting a little compost on the soil and planted them in the spring. And then I covered them up with, then I laid down my irrigation system, which is just it's a soaker hose. And then on top of that, I put this straw, which kind of holds the moisture in. And then every year, including this year, what I do is I pull the straw back, and you can see right here some really dark dirt. And that's a little bit more compost that I add, and I try to do that every other year or so, and that kind of fertilizes them and keeps them healthy. And then I pile the straw back on. As you can see, I've done that there. And so that's kind of how I treat my soil. And raspberries like a really fast-draining soil, and I have no problem with that. On this lot, we're like sand for 8 feet down, so the big problem is getting enough mulch on to really feed the berries. But that's where I begin, and that's kind of what I do every year in terms of feeding the plants. I don't need any pesticides, and I don't add any commercial fertilizer. And they seem to be doing great, so I'm pretty happy about that.
Now, are these ever-bearing or are they summer-bearing?
All of the berries in my plot are summer-bearing. That means that they put on a crop all at once, and that's usually mid-July to mid-August. They start out really sparse, and then pretty soon you're picking so many you don't know what you give them to all the neighbors, which I was able to do this year. So I prefer them to come on all at once, and then I yearn for them for a whole nother year. And I was hoping to be able to tell you about how I take care of them at this time of year, which is kind of the time of year when you get them ready for next season, being fall. So that's okay.
Yes, I'd love to learn.
Yeah. Maybe unfortunately I've already done the fall cleanup for raspberries, but with the summer bearing crops, what you do is you end up with all this foliage, which is now gone, kind of up to about 5 feet tall, and that's where all the berries flowered on canes. And those canes are called the flowering canes. By this time of year, they don't put out any more berries, and it's time to cut them back. So I've done that. I've cut back all the canes that bore fruit this year right to the ground. So none of them are left. So that was the start of my cleanup. And then all summer long, while we were getting fruit, all these new canes are poking up. So everything you see here tied up grew this year. And then what I did was I pulled out or cut off all the kind of weak canes, and then I tied up all the ones raspberries grow so prolifically. I tried to pick 5 or 6 canes and tie them in a bunch, and you can see that that's not totally consistent, but that's what I tried to do. So these are the canes that are going to bear fruit next summer.
So these are the old canes that you cut down.
Right. You can see the little stubs where they're left, but that's all that was left of them. And I suppose you could leave them, but I think they would just take away from the nourishment of the canes that are going to produce fruit next year. So that's why I cut them back. And then I have 3 varieties of raspberries because I like to experiment. And I picked a variety called Tulamine, I think that's right, Tulamine, that are supposed to be really fruitful and, sweet, delicious. And I got that information from one of the fellows at the fruit club and planted those. Well, the canes grew like 10 feet tall, the new ones this year. And there's no way I can harvest fruit at 10 feet. So I chose to clip them back at a height that a 5-footer can kind of reach for next season. And they'll put out side branches, and I'll be able to reach those as well. So that's why they're kind of looking like they've been hacked at the top. But they will survive that and thrive. There's another method of taking care of really, really long canes, and that would be to bend them over and train them on a trellis. But I'm kind of a lazy gardener and elected not to do that. But these were so prolific this year. I think the way I treated them must have worked. So, and it is one of the things that I learned in our Master Gardener class that you could do.
Do you have problems with runners?
All the time, yeah. The raspberries will put out long, they have a substantial root system, and they come out here and come up, and I just cut them off to keep everybody kind of in bounds so that I can get through the mess and pick berries. So yes, that happens.
And what about deer?
I'm really fortunate. We've had 2 deer in 5 years. They did like the raspberries when they came through. They do like raspberries. So if you had problems with deer, they would be after your raspberries. But for some reason, they don't like to cross the highway, and so we don't get very many.
Oh,
and I chase them, but they just look at me, just like in Port Townsend. They aren't afraid of me a bit. So.
What are the other varieties that you have?
I picked another one that I read about and we learned about through the Master Gardener program. It's called Chilliwack. Also supposed to be a little smaller berry, but once again, I like them sweet and tart, and it is. And my first adventure was actually with the row that is just to our left, or right, whichever. And those are called meeker, and they're also, bear fruit once a year, and I think they're the primary berry that's used commercially. And I haven't had as good a luck with them. So I don't know why, whether they're just sited differently. They're delicious, but not as prolific as the Chilliwacks and the Tulamines. So if I had it to do over again, or when I do it over again, I'll probably plant more of these and less of the meeker. So anyway, yeah.
Are they all red?
They are all red, and as you probably know, there's yellow raspberries and dark, deep purple ones.
And the black?
Yeah. And I guess I'm traditional, and I love the red ones. So, and they're so much fun to pick. They're easy to see. I share them with the birds. The birds do love them. But just a row. I think this row is 12 feet long. There are berries to share with the birds, the neighbors, and we get plenty. I've frozen them and made jam, and yeah, on this little row.
I'm surprised that you have a blank space there, Marcia.
Yeah, I know. Well, my vegetable garden is always an experiment, and I have as many failures as I have successes every year. I never know exactly how things will turn out. One of my favorite crops are snow peas and sugar snap peas, which you're supposed to plant early in the season, which I did 3 times this year, and every time I planted, I only got a few peas coming up, so I was sad about that. We did get enough to eat on the last planting, but not very many. So sadly, the peas were a failure this year in one sense. But as you can see right in front of the trellis, I have carrots in abundance this year, and they're long, they're straight, they're sweet, they're just terrific. And I planted 3 different varieties with my experimentation with carrots, and we'll probably leave them in the ground all winter long and eat them, pull them and eat them as we need them in the house. So that was a success.
And probably because you have that good draining soil, you said, so nice loose soil is really good for root vegetables.
Absolutely. Problem that I've had in the past is there's a little carrot maggot that can get into them, and I rotate the crops in the garden to try and avoid those problems, and this year no maggots, so we can just eat the whole carrot and not have to pick out the little brown spots, which is great. A couple of sort of half successes this year. It was a cool spring. And I actually sent away for tomato plants, pepper plants, and I took a flyer on eggplants. And I'm getting tomatoes now. The peppers are the size of my thumb. And and I think once again we had such a cool season that those warm season vegetables didn't do as well as I had hoped. But I'll try them again next year. Maybe it'll be, a better year for those warm season crops. And then another really good success that I had this year are the beans. So maybe we should take a look at the beans. The beans were a success this year. They're just about done. But these are called French fillet beans, and nickel, I think, is the variety. And I used to plant pole beans, but no more. Bush beans are so much easier to grow and take up a lot less space in the garden. I've had literally bushels of beans this year. And even though they're kind of at the end, if I search for a minute, I'll probably find one. Share a bean. They really are good. Well, even that one's a little past its prime. But they come out, they're, thinner than a pencil. And you just blanch them in a little boiling water and salt and pepper and butter, or pickle them, or make 3-bean salad and then give them to the neighbors.
This is quite an interesting mix in this bed.
Yes. This is a fairly new planting for me. I guess I don't know when to stop making new gardens, and this is really a new section of the garden for me. And I used a method that I learned once again through the Master Gardener program, and also directly from Toby Hemingway, who came to the Yard and Garden series this year in Port Townsend, or last year. It's called sheet mulching, and it's not a new concept, but it was new to me. So I decided to take what used to be just turf grass, not really even turf grass, just what was left in the meadow grass, and try sheet mulching this area and planting a new garden. I'd like to describe for you what the process was for putting together a sheet mulched garden. It's really the best way in the world to get rid of grass that you don't want, and then plant something that you do want. So you start by mowing down as short as you can the grass that you've got sitting in your garden, and then sprinkling a little fertilizer of some sort. I use chicken manure on top of the grass. Then water it, because you're going to cover it up with some cardboard next, and you want some moisture under that cardboard. So I went to the recycling center in Port Townsend and grabbed a bunch of the cardboard out of the dumpster and brought it home, and laid it all over the area that was to be the new garden. And then a little more chicken manure, and then all the chopped up compost that I had sitting out back, a layer of about 12 inches. So that's pretty thick, big layer of compost. And then I went and got some actually finished compost from the Port Townsend Composting Center, brought it back in my truck and laid about 3 inches of that on top of that, and then another maybe 2 or 3 inches of straw on top of that. And that was my sheet mulch process. And I had to wait for about 3 or 4 months for everything to kind of settle in and deteriorate and rot. And then I was able to plant what you see here, which is strawberries around the edge. I love sunflowers, and they're cheerful, so I planted sunflowers, and the nasturtiums volunteered themselves. So that was the first year, and now this is the third year of the garden, and you can't see them, but there are some clove currants in here which will reappear when the sunflowers are pulled out. So that was my sheet mulching process. There are other areas of my garden where I've used it, where it's more obvious that the garden is just beginning, and we can look at those if you'd like to.
Let's. So is this a newer bed?
Yes, this is one that I did late this spring. I'm anticipating expanding the the lavender garden here. This is actually my husband's lavender garden, and I love it. And so we said, okay, let's just make a little more lavender garden. And because I'm a lazy gardener, I'm not about to dig out sod and weeds, so here we go with the sheet mulching again. And I just wanted to show you, this was done, like 4 months ago, and it was the same process as I told about before. And now, when you dig down through the top, you can see that the cardboard that smothered out all the grass is now just about deteriorated. And I'll just plant directly into this more of the lavender this fall, and it will do just as well as what I've got going there. So I just, I really love this method of starting a new garden. It works great.
Marcia, this is what happens when you have lots of sun. It's my favorite plant.
Oh, Pam, well, there's a little story behind this. This is a Romnia, I think is right?
Kulturi, yeah.
Yes, a plant that grows wonderfully in dry soils, and I think is a native of California.
Yes.
Well, I've tried planting Romnia 3 times and killed it. This time the Romnia was happy and grew, and I guess it's a notoriously difficult plant to start. But obviously, once it gets going, I'm trying to now figure out how to contain it. So, but I'll never want to get rid of it. I think it's gorgeous.
It's like an eggplant.
Yes, it really is.
A fried eggplant.
Yeah, it's not a great flower for cutting, but just for enjoying out in the garden, it's wonderful. And it's part of my plan for this rather large island garden. I call this my Bellevue Botanical Garden border, and because it's so big. But my idea was, this is the garden that's the farthest from the house, the farthest from any water source, and so it's going to be dry. I live in the Olympic rain shadow, and in a place called Shine, which means that I have a microclimate here that's pretty warm. That and the fast draining soils mean I need to pick plants that don't need a lot of water if I don't want to spend my life watering them. So that's what this garden is about. It's farthest from the house, and I don't give it supplemental water. So I choose plants that can survive under those conditions.
So in the beginning, when you first plant something, you may baby it a little bit.
Yes. If I am foolish enough to buy a plant or get one from a friend and plant it in a season when it's not raining, then I will give it supplemental water. But basically, I don't do that. I plant in the fall, and if you plant in the fall, then the rains come, and the plants get a root system that's really well established, and then you don't have to water them. And I do believe that the only thing I've watered in here this year are a couple of trees that I planted in the spring instead of the fall, and they needed a teeny bit of water to keep from firing.
So here's your ceanothus. It's beautiful. It's really healthy.
Well, it's been in the ground about 3 years, and it's part of that dry island farming that I'm trying to do on this in this area. It's a plant that's native to California again, but does great in our climate. I'm sure lots of people have it in their gardens. And I chose it partly as a barrier between the little dirt road that I live on and people drive up and down, and my garden. And it's growing up and making that barrier quite nicely. I paired it with some rosemary, which blooms blue at the same time as the ceanothus blooms blue. And I got that idea out of the old Heronswood catalog, when Dan Hinckley used to write about plant pairings. This was one of the ones he suggested, and I had a great time putting that in. And it's turning out just like he said it would. So I'm really pleased with that. And kind of going along with the theme of no water, the plantings that are really low to the ground here are also water tolerant, and they're an herb. They're marjoram or oregano that bloom. They've just finished blooming, but the bees absolutely love them. And once again, no water on that part of the garden. So this is one of those wonderful times when the garden that you planned came out the way you planned it, which doesn't always happen. So.
And I noticed that you have the guara here, the fairy wands,
Yes.
that are pink, and these are also things that grow really, really well in California, where in my shady garden they don't do quite so well.
Yeah, exactly right. This garden gets full sun. It has an aspect that faces both west and south, so when the sun shines here, this garden bakes, and so I'm trying to find plants that can tolerate that, and finding lots of them, actually. So it's a lot of fun to do that, and I suppose it's what I ought to be doing as we experience warmer weather over the next decade or so. So, yeah. That, and I also hope that someday this will grow up with some trees as well. So I chose shore pines as the tree to plant in this garden, which is barely peeking up over the top of what is now a hedgerow. But it's another really drought-tolerant plant, and a Northwest native, and is doing well in this location. So, but other than that, the plants chosen here are able to tolerate my neglect. And you know, it's a work in progress, as all gardens are.